wonderful colleagues, panelists, viewers, partners, and friends. We welcome you to this webinar today where we are talking about accelerating commitments, investments, and actions on addressing violence against women and girls during and beyond COVID-19. I'd like to kick us off quite immediately with first an apology for the delays in setting everything up, but we're all happy to be here and happy to get this conversation on the road. I'd like to invite Wangeshi from Crew to kick us off with our introductory remarks before we move on with the agenda for the session. Karibu Wangeshi.
Thank you very much, Linda. I am told that, good afternoon, everybody. I am told that today we are joined by more than 260 people from different parts of the country and the world. And today we are hosting this webinar that is focusing on gender-based violence during this difficult period of COVID-19. And thank you everyone for joining us. We are very, very happy to have you this afternoon, and we are delighted that we're going to have a conversation that is very, very dear to all of us. I'm sure in every space where we are, we continue to hear cases of gender-based violence and violence against women. But I'm equally very, very thrilled because we are joined by a panel of very, very phenomenal women. We are joined by Professor Margaret Kobia, the Cabinet Secretary for Public Service, Youth and Gender Affairs. We are also joined by Anna Mutavati, who is the currently Executive Director, UN Women here in Kenya. We are also joined by Alberta Wambua, the current Executive Director of the Nairobi Women's Hospital. And our moderator for today is Linda Wanjiru. Linda is an advocate and a human rights lawyer. She's also a journalist, so she wears many hats. And she is also currently working as a program officer at Kelling. I would also want to take this opportunity to thank our staff members who continue to support this work, our board members, and our partners who continue to support this important work, focusing on violence against women. And for me, this afternoon, the conversation around how do we accelerate investment, how do we accelerate coordination, how do we accelerate investment around issues of violence against women speaks very, very closely to my heart. And we all know that since the first case of COVID-19 was reported in Kenya, which is 18th March of this year, is that we have seen an increase when it comes to violence against women. The statistics that we have seen so far is that 38% of cases reported in the judiciary goes directly to cases of violence against women or sexual violence and girls. In an interview with the Cabinet Secretary, who is with us today, is that in March, he also highlighted that 42% of cases, there has been an increase in cases of GBV at 42%. At an organization level that we are currently working in 8 counties, we have also seen an increase with about 53%. And the last time I checked, which was yesterday, we had reported 358 cases reported to our hotline. And finally, in terms of data, is that the national hotline, which is 1195, has also indicated 753 cases, and that is of today. So when you look at that data, when you look at those statistics, they're telling us something. And why then today we are converging is to be able to see how do we accelerate this work? Is this an opportunity for us to change the tide and ensure that the resources that are required, the actions that are required, this is the time to be able to bring this change. So once again, I want to welcome you to this conversation. Please send your comments and your question, and we have a very, very able panel that will be able to discuss, propose suggestion. We want to be at a place where we are making suggestions, we are making concrete plans that can even be changed to policy. So I welcome you to this webinar, and we are hoping that with the time we are going to be here for the next 2 hours, is going to be productive, and is going to be even take it further, even at an organization level and at a policy level. Welcome to this event. This is our event, and once again, Karibu. And I'll hand over to Linda so that then she can be able to introduce our panel discussant for this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wangeshi, for painting such a wonderful context to the conversation that we're having here this afternoon. Without further ado, let me give a bio of our panelists, and I'll start with our CS, Professor Margaret Kobia, who is also has had a illustrious career in education and government. She is an ardent She is an ardent supporter of gender and women issues. In recognition of her distinguished service and contributions to national development, she is an awardee of the Order of Grand Warrior, First Class Order of Chief of the Burning Spear by the President of Kenya in 2007 and 2009. And in addition to this, she has also been honored by the American Biographical Institute for her dedication and contribution to management in the public service. In this illustrious career, we are happy to have her within this space, within the gender space, where she's been able to spearhead quite a number of projects within her docket, which we will be looking at quite in depth when we delve into the conversations this afternoon. Also, in our panel, we are joined by Anna Mutavati from UN Women in Kenya. She is the country representative. She is a gender equality advocate and women's rights lawyer with 21 years experience. She has worked with UNFPA, UNICEF, UN Women, and the Zimbabwe Women Lawyers Association in programming and senior leadership capacities across the continent. Third on my list is Ms. Alberta Wambua, who is the Executive Director for the GVRC right here in the country, the Gender Violence Recovery Center. Ms. Alberta has worked in the gender violence sector for a number of years. She has implemented programs on GBV prevention and response in 9 hospitals, so quite a rich experience in GBV management at the clinical level and at the program level. She was involved in medical services and psychosocial support, emergency response in conflict areas in the country and also within the continent. And she has coordinated a center of excellence in managing GBV, providing free, quality, and comprehensive medical treatment and psychosocial support to more than 4,000 survivors. Quite a lot of achievements from our panelists. And last but not least, Ms. Wangeshi, who is the Executive Director of CREW, which is the Center for Rights, Education, and Awareness. She is a feminist, a women's rights organization, and runs a women's rights organization, NGO, CREW, with a focus on champion building and agency building amongst women and girls to transform and build an equal society. She is highly motivated, creative, and versatile. I can attest to that. And she has worked previously in the NGO Council and quite a number of non-governmental areas on strategy, programming, and even leadership. Ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, we have quite an extensive collective experience with the members who are present with us. And they're more than capable to be able to answer any of the questions that we'll have on the discourse within the first hour and in the plenary that we will move on to within the second hour. So allow me to delve into the questions that we have today. They're centered on feedback that we've had both in our experiences within the sector, trends that we have been seeing in the country during the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, and of course, feedback from yourselves as partners, stakeholders, and citizens of Kenya and Africa. So allow me to delve into the first question, which I will direct to you, Professor Kobia. And it's dealing with violence against women during this COVID-19 pandemic. So we know that violence against women has increased during this pandemic. We've seen the numbers. We've had the highlight from Wangeshi. We've had the Chief Justice actually highlight some of these issues. What are the measures the Ministry of Gender has put in place to address the situation? For example, we know that accessibility to shelters continues to be a big challenge for our survivors, more so during this COVID-19 period and the measures put in place to contain it. What are the plans for the ministry to cushion some of the effects that we have seen on the ground? Over to you, Professor Kobia.
Hello, you can hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you very much, Linda. Let me recognize Anna Mutapati, the UN Women Country Director, Washira Wangeshi, the Executive Director, Albata, and all the other participants. I'm very happy to join you this afternoon, really to get a deep understanding and how we should be responding to gender-based violence. Just before I answer your question very briefly, I would like to say the State Department of Gender works around 4 pillars. One, this is leadership and decision-making, socioeconomic empowerment for women, women in peace and security, and gender-based violence. The reason why I wanted to bring the whole 4 pillars is for you to understand that there is a relationship between these pillars. And to come to the gender-based violence, which is a very complex topic, I think we need to understand people who are economically empowered have a way of being able to overcome. Therefore, we find gender-based violence tend to target on women, youth, especially if they are women, and the poor people. Therefore, for us to start understanding how we should be able to respond, we also now find with the COVID, the situation is made more complex. For example, you find, of course, most of the health centers, because of working around the COVID, they are not offering the services that they would have if there was no COVID. Also, there's police who we work very closely with the police station. You find they are out there doing the curfew and they are also overwhelmed. So if there is an incidence of gender-based violence now or domestic violence, then the problem is more compounded, or the victims are likely to experience more challenges. We may then ask ourselves, are there opportunities? Because what we see is COVID has a negative impact, or is likely to erode all the gains women have made towards equality. And these gains are likely to be eroded, especially if they are violated, assaulted, their confidence is taken away. If they have to spend money because they have some bodily harm, that is also includes a cost. Therefore, we must ask ourselves as people who work in gender space, what is this that we are going to put on the table as something new? Being able, I can say maybe working on the gender space, we could say maybe we had made advances to make something like 60%, but this can be pushed to something like 40% regarding gender-based violence. Therefore, we must be able to say, is there an opportunity how we respond on COVID that now we can make, we can actually level, let's say level the gender-based curve. As they say, we are leveling the COVID curve. Can we level the curve for gender-based? Therefore, we have had the question to ask ourselves, because also we know, Linda, those who report gender-based violence or domestic violence, in fact, sometimes some literature show is not more than 30%. So 70 cases go unreported. So you can already start feeling the whole complexity of gender-based. Then we can easily find women and the youth continuing to suffer more. And I think COVID has even complicated it more, because even 70% of the women who are working in the health sector are actually women. So you cannot see that front. And of course, now with the curfew, where people are trying to beat the time to go home, we have found people being assaulted when they are going home by even people who are supposed to take care of them. Therefore, it is taking defilement has increased, as you say, judicially, as pointed out, and this defilement is from people who are known to these victims. So we find everything has increased, and it's not a Kenyan context only. Even the SG, the Secretary General of the UN, already the data shows that a percent increment of domestic violence since COVID. Therefore, today we must be finding, are we going to break new grounds of how we respond to gender-based violence as people who work around this space? Because the role of government is to make sure each and every citizen has a peaceful environment as our Vision 2030, but gender-based violence, if allowed to continue with its cultural surroundings that many times we read the books that say if a man beats his wife, some people are wondering, oh, he was just disciplining her. But to me, my final call is each one of us, we must now appeal to the community. We must have partnership so that we raise our voice. Because if we are not raising our voice, then I think then it might not get the attention. Two, it is good to say we'll do 1, 2, 3. But if you have not seen the how, even when you talk about the partnership, then we are saying the partnership may be to support a helpline. We must be able to say exactly what will happen so that you don't just end up with just saying this is the issue, but you have not provided a structured, adequate way of dealing with the problem. Therefore, government has done many efforts. I think, as I've said, this was the area, one of the pillars we have been working on. We have the helpline, which is 1195, where anybody who senses a danger of being violated or has been assaulted, both emotional and the physical, they can call and they can get support, especially where we have a directory where they can get more help. They can also get somebody to talk to, because some people, when you get this experience, you are completely ruined. So you need to talk to somebody who can tell you what you need to do next. But you also understand the situation. Even calling this line is not as straightforward as you might imagine. Some have to hide. If it's your spouse who has assaulted you and you're in the same house, how do you report? So I think that intrigue, I think, us being to unpack this. And they say today, we'll do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to help the victims. I think is very important, because the efforts range from having the right laws that prevent gender-based violence. We have the courts, we have the police, we have the helpline, we have kind of even trying to give, like now government is trying to give social support, cash transfer in terms of, because we find why has these cases increased. And maybe we will touch that later, because we are all under stress. Children at home, the work for the people is becoming overwhelmed. And when people are irritable and going through stressful situation because maybe of lack of a job, they have no resources, then definitely they become more irritable. And they are likely to have a conflict which must result to gender-based violence. And we need also to, what are the early warnings, so that you don't wait until it happens, and what do people need to do? Let me stop here. I think because I've taken quite a bit of time, but I'm here for quite some time, up to 1 hour. So let's not hurry it, let's do it well, because I also feel what you're doing my job. And unless we come together, if we are going to overcome gender-based violence or defeat COVID, we are going to do it together. I thank you. Linda?
Awesome, great. Thank you very much, Professor, for that wonderful response to my question. Very comprehensive and touched on quite a few key tenets of the discussion that we're having today on accelerating the promise towards ending GBV, and most especially towards GBV surges that we've seen during this period of COVID-19. Maybe as a follow-up question to the conversation that we've just had now, Professor Kobia, let me ask Ms. Anna Mutavati to share with us what are some of the efforts and interventions working at the United Nations Women Country Office in Kenya, and obviously having a closer relation with other UN agencies and other country offices. what are some of the efforts and interventions and lessons from the globe that we here in Kenya, as partners, as stakeholders, can adopt towards better prevention and response on violence against women during COVID-19?
Thank you very much, Linda, for the question. Let me acknowledge our CS, the presence of our CS, and really thank you, Madam CS, for your very visible leadership during this period. And really also appreciate you for being available on many different forums, raising these issues and raising awareness and ensuring that they are being considered in the different discussions that are happening around COVID-19. I also acknowledge my fellow panelists and our host crew, and thank you for organizing this platform. And I agree with CS that let this help concretize the actions. Let this panel really quantify the support that's being provided out there. So in addition to all of that, let it also be a platform to help us step to the next level of programming in the area of GBV, so that we will not go back to where we were before COVID-19, but really build on this momentum that this crisis has created in terms of awareness of GBV, but also the actions that need to be taken across the different sectors. So our role as UN Women, so primarily we are there to help advocate, to help bring out this issue that has been termed a shadow pandemic. So we are fighting COVID-19, but there is a shadow pandemic that's also happening, and this is GBV. So our efforts are really to support government to make sure that we put this shadow pandemic under the spotlight, so that it doesn't continue to wreak havoc in the lives of women, girls, men and boys, but that it's under the spotlight, because once you put something under the spotlight, you know, it has no place to hide. So we are flashing it out of the private spaces where it's happening and bringing it to everyone's attention, so that the abusers have no place to hide. Our role is also as the UN Women to help document good practices from other countries and share, so that we motivate each other, we inspire, and then we also see how else we can strengthen our own response at the national level. So allow me therefore, Linda, to share a few practices that we have documented from around the globe. So in Canada, we learned that the government announced an allocation of $50 million Canadian dollars to support shelters to respond to sexual assault centers, to support sexual assault cases for survivors of violence. So that was a $50 million allocation that government gave, particularly to address the issue of shelter. So where do you go if you are stuck at home with somebody who is abusing you? And that's supposed to be the safe place for you to be. So to be able to provide an alternative safe space for women who are experiencing that. So this is the commitment that government of Canada has put in place. In South Africa, we also learned that government of South Africa announced a strategy to assist NGOs who are in service provision. And so they earmarked relief funds for this sector. So a government funding going towards NGOs who are helping with service provision as part of the response. We also learned that in Tunisia, UN agencies and civil society organizations managed to redirect funding into emergency support for survivors of violence. So all this other funding that had been there for other development programs, the UN agencies in Tunisia redirected some of that funding. In Kenya, because sometimes when we look at lessons learned and good practices, we forget also to look at what is happening at home. So let me also say here, in terms of policies and funding, that in Kenya, UN agencies, several UN agencies, I can mention UNFPA and UN Women and UNICEF, to some extent, have also reprogrammed some of their existing funding that was meant for other things, like CSW, like so many other things, so that it goes towards supporting GBV services at the center, particularly 1195, and also at county level. There was a question in terms of what private sector is also doing. So good practice for our private sector to learn from. In the US, the Ford Foundation, along with 40 other US-based international foundations, redirected their existing financial commitments to support services that are going towards GBV. Very specific things in terms of access to services. We have just learned from our host, Wangeshi, that we are supporting expanded services through the 1195 hotline. So the 1195 hotline is fast becoming like our 911 for GBV, and 753 cases have so far been reported since COVID-19 started. In France and Italy and Spain, we learned that they put in place a special measure where women can alert pharmacies about a domestic violence situation with a code message that was specifically created to facilitate police and others to support immediately. In Argentina, we also learned that they have put in place measures where police are being dispatched to the homes of women that are reporting in order to stop violence and to remove the aggressor. In South Africa, you are aware that there was a situation of total lockdown, so not even anybody was allowed to move. But the Chief Justice authorized the heads of court and magistrates to issue directives to enable access to courts in relation to urgent matters, such as bail applications, domestic violence, and children-related cases. I'm almost concluding, but I wanted to share two other interesting good practices from other countries. In a country called Antigua and Barbuda, the Director of Gender Affairs partnered with telecommunications, two major telecommunication firms, to ensure toll-free access to domestic violence helplines. In Madrid and Spain, they instituted an instant messaging platform that uses GPS to locate women in dangerous situations and then be able to give them emergency services. I think this is particularly important because CS highlighted that, so it's not enough just having an 1195. We need to think through very specific challenges, difficulties to operationalize that 1195. So in Madrid, Spain, I think they attached a function that allows the police to use GPS to locate where this report is coming from, so that that woman can access services quickly. Finally, in the UK, we learned that the police have appealed to postal workers. They've also appealed to delivery drivers and food delivery companies who visit homes to look out for signs of abuse and report them to the police department. So there is a lot that is happening. I cannot end without citing my home country in Zimbabwe, where the UN Trust Fund is supporting telecommunication companies to issue out bulk SMS messages, again now aimed at preventing GBV. So instead of receiving just all these messages from telecommunication companies that are about caller tunes and so on and so forth, they are using those mass SMS platforms to send out key messages around prevention of gender-based violence. So let me stop here and hand over back to Linda. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ms. Anna Mutavati. That was quite a comprehensive comparative analysis of some of the lessons that we can borrow from other countries in the region and in the world in terms of trying to prevent and responding and managing gender-based violence. and most importantly, violence against women and girls during this COVID-19 pandemic. So quite a number of things have been mentioned, and notably, we see quite a lot of things that we also here in the country have undertaken. And maybe to echo what our CS was saying, Professor Kobia, that indeed when we come together and concert our efforts, we can be able to have a greater impact and intervene in a better way as stakeholders across state and non-state entities. And allow me to go back to you, Professor Kobia, and highlight that the ministry recently launched the second National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security 2020-2024. And with the surge that we have seen in the country in the last couple of 2 months, now going on 3, on violence against women and girls, exacerbated obviously by the COVID-19 pandemic and the measures that we've seen, and quite a number of stresses, socioeconomic stressors and the like, what policy actions and programs has the ministry set up, or does it intend to set up in response to this, to ensure the improvement of women and girls' social, economic, and health status, since these are some of the risk factors that are being experienced at a very personal level by survivors of violence against women and girls? Over to you, Professor. If you could just unmute.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Wonderful, wonderful.
Sorry,
thank
sorry.
you.
I hope you can hear me now. It
Yes,
always
yeah.
happens. We are always kind of forgetting to kind of unmute when we are on. Let me say that in government, one of the responsibility is actually policy and coordination. Government might not be the doer on the ground, but the government, in partnership with our stakeholders, will sit around the table and make a policy to cover the whole area on gender space. And it is in that table that we decide what are the challenges and what will the government do to address these issues. It is against, and of course, once the policy is made, different actors take different portions of the area they are interested with to work. In Kenyan government, we work around what we call gender sector working group, so that everybody who is in the civil society, those who in the academia, those other ministries, gender is a cross-cutting issue that the Ministry of Interior would be dealing with it, Ministry of Education would be dealing with a portion. So everybody kind of have a space with this gender. So I think I would like the participants to know our role is mostly to have a policy in place so that everybody and the policy just says what will the government do in a particular challenge and how it will happen. Then it is that policy now every actor takes and puts in their plan. And within that plan, maybe perhaps gives its budget so that it can be able to implement it. Therefore, that's why now we came with what we call Kenya National Action Plan 1, which is just about 4 years ago, which helped us refocus on the UN Resolution 1325, which talks about women and in security, peace and security. Therefore, we have just been launching the second NAP so that we can be able to implement some plans within that document. Therefore, what the government has done through the State Department of Gender is partnering with the Ministry of Interior, and you know why the Ministry of Interior, it plays a very significant role in implementing some of the security matters and on the ground. Therefore, within the policy, there's already a space how different actors can be able to take a certain challenge like in gender-based and be able to see what has been done and what remains undone, because a policy is something that we continue implementing. Therefore, in the area of women and security, we already have, of course, the relevant laws, because we all know that gender-based violence or domestic violence is a crime. So there are relevant laws that make sure that if somebody is assaulted or is abused, what they need to do so that they can also get the redress. Therefore, in the particular plan that we have, it gives us an opportunity for everybody. I think it was when it was launched, it was shared, it is online, to be able to look at how can we engage other partners in being able to make women more secure and maybe have some peace. That's why we find in the area of right on the ground, we work very closely. The NAP provides a framework how we work closely with the counties. And within the counties, we will have kind of like a biannual meeting between national government and the county government to be able to report, because even then the county governments also take this Kenya National Action Plan, then go and they put it together with the integrated county strategic plan. Because if one thing we need to know that even if you have one of the best idea, but you did not support it with the budget, then it will never be done. So the framework we provide within NAP allows us from national to the county, how the county government can be able to give themselves targets. How do we reduce gender-based violence on the ground? They will set themselves targets and then they'll be able to monitor them. So, and I think it is still a document that it provides broad areas that will work towards reducing security and safety for the women. Maybe I would also say that we also bring in within the plan we bring in is like the community of those who work in judiciary, those who work with the police, the whole justice system, so that it is clear, because we realize when we do not work in a coordinated manner, even somebody who reports a matter in police station and maybe the matter goes to court. One time, maybe the police who took the matter to court is not the one coming to give evidence, or the evidence is not practiced very well. Then we end up the cases and dragging forever, and sometimes they're not justice not being given to the person who is offended. We have also seen the capacity building is one of the strengths of the plan. Capacity building for the duty bearers, right from the police, for the community elders, so that they know exactly, one, awareness about these cases, and the two, what they will be required to do if they come across a situation of gender-based violence or domestic violence. And of course, to sensitize them that these cases are criminal, and you can also decide, even at the elders level, that we will sort it out as elders. You know, we have had cases where people are compensated with a few shillings or a goat so that the matter is dropped. So I think that being able to sensitize within the framework of right from national government to the county government, to the community, the elders, and I'm just forgetting the one we use for the court users. I think it's committee of court users, that they are all sensitized, so that even if there are no resources, at least the whole court users committee is able to address some of the issues and also be able to have data. Because I know one of the things that if you have not captured your data very well, you are not able to report what you had this month, what was done, and are you increasing or are you backsliding? So I think all those are very critical. I would also touch on FGM, because it's the worst kind of violation. In fact, even now, a few cases have been reported, just as the girls at home. Some were experiencing, of course, the defilement. The others who are going through the cut, because now they are confined. So it's like being able to work around with the chief, assistant chief. There's a framework that we work with the chief, assistant chief, and the whole idea was every location, the assistant chief knows, especially in the 22 counties where this is practiced, they know where the girls are, and should that happen, it will be upon themselves. So I think those are some of the areas we have seen in the Kenya National Action Plan. being flagged out so that we can know this is what we set out to do as a nation. But together with the county, the civil society, and the grassroots people, then we can, all of them have a framework to be able to monitor to what extent is women in peace and security is improving within their localities. And of course, I think in the plan, we have looked at the community, the role of the community, including churches, where sometimes what we expect maybe the churches to bring out and talk against, sometimes they may not. But we are it's also the provision for making sure that they take that as a responsibility of making this sure there's justice within the gender-based violence. Linda?
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Professor Kobia. That was quite a very detailed breakdown of what the Kenya National Plan of Action looks like in terms of addressing violence against women and girls, and really delves into the next aspect of our questions, which is going to what you've called to the doers on the ground, where we are fostering collaboration among state and non-state entities, both at national and county level, across civil society, across government. And I want to throw this to Wangeshi and shortly thereafter Albata, in terms of what we've seen on the ground with regard to GBV data and GBV response and management. What can you tell us with the demand, with the surge that we've seen due to the pandemic and the crisis, what measures have been put in place in terms of access to justice, in terms of medical management, in terms of documenting the cases that are brought forward to the system, and even in the communities where they are not able to access this referral pathways because of fear, because of stigma centered around the COVID-19 pandemic. So we'll take a two-pronged approach to this question, and I'll ask Wangeshi from Crew to go first, and then we'll have Albata from the GVRC stepping in and sharing some of the highlights in terms of clinical management from the GVRC aspect and also components of access to justice. Wangeshi? Okay.
Thank you, Linda. I think as an organization, we have been monitoring the pathway for the increased risk factors for violence against women and girls. And what we have observed that economic stress on families as a result of COVID-19. And this is because a lot of families have either lost their jobs, people, they have had pay cuts, they have been laid off from their current employment. We have seen women, for example, every day would wake up to go work in other homes. The mama fuas, they are no longer able to gain that income. So this is causing a lot of economic stress in the families. I think the other thing that we have also seen is the restricted access to institutions. Another important pathway that we have been observing, and this is because the accessibility to courts is not as it were before. The police stations, I think Professor Kobe already highlighted that a lot of police have shifted majority of the resources to respond to COVID-19. And this, when it comes to reporting, make it very, very difficult for survivors, but also creating what I would call impunity, because if the case is not likely to go forth, it means that whoever is doing this then feels they can get away with it. The lockdown in some of the parts of the counties, for example, Nairobi, it's a lockdown, Kilifi, Mombasa, Kwale, again, reporting many cases. And this is because in any other day, if someone was going through violence, then they would be able to plan and say, I will get out of this town and maybe be able to travel back home to be with my relatives or my parents where I am not experiencing violence. And the fourth pathway that we have really looked at is the closure of schools. We all know schools have been closed and making it very, very vulnerable for young girls being very vulnerable and for them going through sexual violence. The women's rights organizations and movement have also been able to organize themselves and see how do we respond to this COVID-19, specifically looking at issues of violence against women and girls, but also looking at issues of gender-based violence. And I keep saying that this organization, they always act at the critical annexure between the survivor and the government during a time like now. What we have seen, for example, CREW, we continue to provide legal support, and we're also providing counseling, and we're doing this through virtual ways, meaning we have a counselor, we have a lawyer who can be able to receive, for survivors who can be able to receive counseling and also legal support. And if someone in any part of the country is going through violence, we are referring them to 1195, which is the national hotline. But also we have one as an organization that we have been able to support the survivors, and the number is 0800 720 186, and you can be able to reach us on this number. We're also doing referrals to other institutions, closely working with the medical institution like Nairobi Women's Hospital, ensuring that survivors are able to get both medical, legal, and psychosocial support. What we have also done, and have also seen other organizations and women's rights group and movement coming together, is provision of food. A lot of people are hungry. I have seen grassroots women groups and human rights defenders coming together and putting in food and distributing to very, very vulnerable groups. I've also seen them come together, and CREW is also doing this, is provision of dignity kits. And I'm happy because in the next 1 year, we'll be able to distribute this in 10 counties, working with other strategic partners. We're also doing cash transfers. And for us, cash transfer is because we strongly believe that cash transfer and has been documented as a very, very model that does reduce violence against women and girls. So cash transfer is a model that can be adapted, that can be taken up. I know the national government already has a plan around, already has a program that is being implemented around cash transfer, but going further to ask the questions, when we do the cash transfer at a household level, who is receiving the money? Is it the man? Is it the woman? How are decisions being made around that money? Do we include female-headed families when we're doing the cash transfer? When you have that cash, there is issue of power. How is that power discussed by whoever has the money? So it's very, very important that as the cash transfer are being done, that we are able to look at who received the money and decision-making around that. I think the other one is around provision of shelters, and provision of shelters remain a very, very big challenge in this country. We don't have state supported shelters. And for me, I think moving forward would probably would like to see what can we do about these shelters. The shelters that currently are in place are supported by development partners, which is good. But moving forward, I think we would want to have a way of sustaining them. At the national level, at the county level, is it possible for counties to start allocating resources for shelter so that as women are going through violence, they can be able to do that? You can imagine if you're in a lockdown county like Nairobi, and I've had many calls of women saying, I am not able to continue living in this house. I'm going through violence. This COVID, what it has actually just unearthed is what we already knew, that homes sometimes are not the safest place for women. And therefore, I think moving forward, it will be good to see how do we put the reality of shelters. Are we going to look at the schools that currently no one is occupying? Can we be able to look at quarantine centers? Can we be able to look for church facilities that will be able to provide these safe spaces for women? Because we may not be able to construct shelters within the next few days, but we can be able to look at the existing structures and be able to convert them as a place whereby women can be able to seek refuge for a number of days. So Linda, I'll stop there so that my colleague Alberta can also be able to build up on that.
Some great, Wangeshi. Quite a comprehensive breakdown. And one key thing that stands out to me is the aspect of the feminization of poverty when it comes to the root causes of some of the gender issues that we deal with, including violence against women and girls. And now moving on to the clinical angle and the access to justice connectivity, I'd like to pose the same question to you, Alberta, and hear your input with due regard from GVRC's point of view.
So thank you. Thank you, Professor Kopia, Madam Anne, Wangeshi, Linda, and all the participants. So I'll respond in terms of response to gender-based violence. So at the Gender Violence Recovery Center, as we rightfully have discussed, cases of gender-based violence have risen globally, nationally, and at GVRC, this has risen by 45%. So already there was a problem in that we had not planned to have an upsurge of clients around this time. So that also then in terms of resources, in terms of human resources, in terms of mentally, even just being prepared as frontline workers, that was also a challenge because normally would, for example, predict quote unquote the cycle of crisis when then the survivors of cases of gender-based violence would increase. The uniqueness about this particular, I'll call it emergency response, has been the risk, or would I say, the safety issues that come with it. The frontline workers, unlike all the other times, this time there's COVID, there's coronavirus. So then there comes the issues of PPEs. It came again, the issues of staff not being comfortable mentally, also fearing, for example, to provide support to survivors. Survivors were scared to report to the hospital. Again, we have the cessations, the movements, what we've discussed about the cost of transport. So this also became really a challenge for survivors actually seeking support, and not just support, but it's also become a challenge in terms of follow-up cases, because then as an outpatient on a medical regime, you'd have to come to the hospital for about 6 months. So this has also posed a challenge. So now the dynamics in terms of how clients are presenting to the health facility is very different. So one, we're having what we call late presentations. Survivors, because of what I've mentioned, are not coming within the 72 hours as prescribed. So you're not working with prophylactic treatment for some of them. So of late, for example, we're having a lot of teenage girls who are now pregnant. Again, we're having late referrals. So if then, for example, they're able to reach a health facility within their locality, we are getting, as late as yesterday, I was getting 2 referrals. You know, you're getting one who's already burnt 2-3 weeks ago. The wounds are now septic. You're getting one who got a head injury. It's about a week ago. That's when then they're referring and they need theater and ICU care. So you're getting very critically ill survivors. Unlike before, so a lot of them are coming as late presentations. And then that also poses a question to all of our service providers. Does it mean that once we say, for example, this pandemic is over, we might get then a lot of other survivors coming way after that? There's a lot also of challenges in referral mechanisms. That was also mentioned a bit earlier. How then the different, because we talked about the police, Professor talked about the police, for example, now being more into the roadblocks and all that. We have, for example, the health workers, now there's pressure to respond to COVID. So the access to justice that you asked me about, Linda, so it's a bit slow. Courts were closed for some time. So it's a bit, and for women and girls and men and boys, it's your health that comes first. So very few of them, for example, are seeking to report to the police stations or to follow up with the access to justice process. So that's also a challenge. We also have a lot of mental health cases now, or rather a lot of mental wellness that is needed, not just for survivors, but also the public. Earlier, Professor and I think Wangeshi talked about we are now home. So we're not certain, including myself, how does this go? For how long will it go? We have homeschooling, we have children at home. So there's a lot of certainty. We have pay cuts, we have loss of jobs. So there's a lot of pressure and need us to think about not just the gender violence survivors, but also the public at large, that their mental health concerns that we need to also take into consideration. Some of the challenges we've seen again with the survivors who come, whereas before we just provide support for gender-based violence services, we now have to think and provide support for sexual reproductive health services and commodities, including also maternal health. So you're having these women and girls, men and boys, for example, coming in, and when it's not just gender-based violence, then now we have to go further, for example, and provide dignity kits. Provide, would I say, the cash transfers Wangeshi was talking about, or food basics, you know. So they're there, they don't have that support. Again, we don't have the shelters. So that has been also a lot of challenge. Before we'd have, for example, at GVSC, we'd have the primary prevention arm. So that's basically just creating awareness, targeted awareness to different target groups, and then would easily link it up with the response system. But now the primary prevention and their community activities have either stalled or come to a standstill. I mean, a standstill or slowed down. So it's very hard to link between the primary prevention activities. I saw a lecturer called Munyao talking about, for example, men engagement. It's very hard to have those activities going on and linking them directly to response. So it's really become hard. We've also tried to have toll-free numbers to provide counseling, for example, virtually, but counseling again, and the toll-frees also have their own concerns because of the confidentiality issues, the survivors being able, for example, to have access to the phones, to the power, to the survivors being around them. So that also has posed a challenge. So these are the different kind of dynamics that have come. Again, I co-chair the gender sector working group. And what we've also done is that then continuously on a weekly basis, would have meetings and discuss and also provide solutions. And so we'd share experiences about what we are all seeing. So it's very multi-sectoral, very different, multi-level, and we would have different discussions. We've been able to leverage on technology, for example. The police have an app called Mulika, for example. So we've also had opportunities to discuss with different players. We have amazing group of ladies and men who run the shelters, and they're now coming together, and they've so far, for example, mapped 12 counties. That's around 30 shelters that are functioning. So that has also become a very data management. We're able to share the data. We're able to see the dynamics that, for example, I was talking about from the different groups. We're able to follow up with hotlines coming together or the referral mechanism. So that has also helped us to really be able to effectively respond to survivors of gender-based violence. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much, Alberta. Quite comprehensive and a great picture on what the situation on the ground is, and also from your experience with and through the eyes of GBRC. Now, we are well within past our 1 hour of conversation, and which is the duration within which Professor Kobia had graciously given us some time. So right before she begs her leave, I will share maybe one question, Professor, if you'll allow me, from the public. I will combine it into two and make it very brief, but still well encompassing of the issues that they would like to have highlighted. And this comes from Werimo Munyini Wahome, the Executive Director of COVAL, complemented by another question by Naomi Monda, the Program Associate for Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights at Kelin. So for Wairimo Munyini Wahome, she asks that we have our 8-point stimulus for our economic rejuvenation in the country that was shared by our Honorable President, and what urgent priorities can we expect from state in terms of taking forward the agenda on GBV and quite specifically violence against women. The second question comes in terms of shelters. We know that in the past 1 year, there have been quite a number of collaborations between state and non-state actors towards establishing shelters for GBV survivors. Can we tangibly say that we will see more shelters on the ground in the year, in the course of the year maybe, and in the years to come? Professor?
Thank you very much, Linda. Let me start with the question regarding the 80-point stimuli package that the Secretary the President did give. But before that, you remember the first stimulus where there was a raft of measures regarding taxation and making sure that also cash transfer and any other support that was going to make us be able to meet, to kind of compact the very fast towards the end of March. The 8-point stimulus that was given in 2 weeks ago or so, it has something to, some money was given for infrastructure, education sector, where we are supposed to hire more teachers, because remember, if children are at home, and we have always experienced shortage of teachers, hiring intern teachers still is going like back to our rural homes and getting people who have no jobs, and they're able to become intern teachers. Also, the SMEs, I think one of the things we know is that small and medium enterprises, that's where a majority of the women have kind of livelihood. Therefore, there's given about 2 billion, which will go to SMEs financing, because it looks like although there's a debate, every time small businesses go down, most of us tend to think the problem is finance, but sometimes it's not only finance. Perhaps this is the time we start looking, those women which are, those businesses that are owned by women, especially remember that we have women enterprise fund that give a little fund at no interest rate or very low administrative fee for women who are small businesses. And this is really encouraging, because much as we are fighting gender-based violence, we know that those who are economically empowered, they have a voice and they can be able to make decisions. So that means the little money they get, maybe to start chicken, the next time they are able to move to a shop. If I was keeping chicken, then I hire a shop, I am able to do trade. And most of them actually have been able to go to the bank. And actually some, and we could be aware, some women have been able to go to the transport business, they have built some hostels. So much as it looks small, getting some resources from going to SMEs to employ themselves and more people is a promise actually to confronting this gender-based violence. Then we are hiring quite a number of people, health sector, human resource, we are hiring almost 8,000 people, from doctors to community health workers. Those are also adding the number of people who are struggling with no income, that stimulus will go to hiring health HR people. Agriculture also got some resources. Tourism, I think even recently we are saying the tourism and the value chain that tourism creates. Because if we are doing agriculture, but hotels are closed, that means whatever we are producing, we are not able to get it to the hotels who used to be the clients. Therefore, we need to think of the whole value chain of tourism and hospitality, how many people have become jobless. And when they become jobless, it's a source of strain at home. And most likely, that's where the gender-based violence could be a problem. Then we are looking at the environment and of course at the manufacturing. Those are the 80 points. If you look at all those, some money has been released so that it can start circulating and cautioning, and even some of the money going as social protection within homes. Two questions that have arisen in that effort in the two stimulus is, can we have a percentage that is ring fence for women? I think that was somewhat the area that we were working around, that yes, you can get a stimulus package, but how much of it is going to women? Oh yes, we can have cash transfer. Who is the head of household who is going to get the cash transfer? And we have been able to influence. If they went to women, then they will be able to give food and everybody will be catered for, as if you gave to maybe the other spouse who might not be able to do. In manufacturing and value addition. So I think what my ministry, State Department of Gender, is doing in these committees where we sit, we want to see a figure attached to gender, so that now gender of the women, so that they can say, oh, okay, out of this 2 billion, X will go to women. I think that is a good effort, because that's where in the past we have not been very much awake. So what I would appeal is, all of us, wherever we sit, we should be able to raise our voices and campaign for a percentage of whatever is being kind of discussed, may it be numbers of number kumi on the ground, because when women voices are there, their interests are taken care of. If they are not there, then your interest definitely will not be taken care of. I think I've said it many times, even as women who are championing for gender equality, do not wait. I think most of us sit over the fence and wait. But I think it's good to make inroad and make your what you want, have clarity of what you want. Therefore, I think in that, in terms of stimulus, I think, most of our leaders think men. So they don't just think, oh, can we bring gender perspective in the decisions that we are making? But you have seen whenever we are pushed, and I think you must appreciate the Kenyan government, it has a State Department of Gender. They never used to be there. Therefore, we are just having a whole team of people committed to working around the policy and coordination. So I think this is a good starting point, but sometimes government is overwhelmed because it takes care of everybody. And I want to move to the second question of the shelters. It is true the shelters are very few. And I know some in Kibera, maybe some in Kirifi, Makueni. I know the women county representatives, a few are working around rescue centers. But we have also come up with a model of this rescue center with guidelines. Now moving forward, everything you do is within a protocol. Mm-hmm. If you have these centers, how are they going to look like? What are the guidelines? Because also they are taking care maybe of human trafficking. They are taking care of children, maybe girls with early pregnancies. They are taking care of people so that when they are there, they can also be given a skill. So it is all comprehensive, and you can start. We are saying you start small, but you can also go incrementally. We have seen in some counties where they have started maybe with a small center, but with the time and the way the women are given a National Affirmative Fund, they have continued to increase. But I also want to put a caution on shelters. Not every woman who has been assaulted will go to shelter. Because one, and I've said this before, if I go to this, and again, that's why it's very complex with gender-based violence. Not one, do we call not one fit all? Yes. In the sense that, what you do to X is not exactly what you do to Y. One, if I am assaulted by my husband and I now need to go to the shelter, I will remember my children who I'm living with. So most women will not even want to say they want to go to the shelter, but they want some form of help. How do we people who work in gender space will be able to have different interventions that speak to different challenge? So I think so much as we are having shelters, and I think the reason why the government has not been really committing resources on shelters, because it has been working more on preventive. Because you don't want that activity has happened so that people can go to the shelter, and we work on preventive and protective. And then when we have enough data as is pointing, then we need the shelter. I think we have been persuaded shelter, especially for women who are young and get pregnant and want to go there, maybe where we are waiting to have their baby, or maybe after they have had their baby, they want to learn a skill. A shelter makes a lot of difference. But there is also within that shelter where you can have maybe a smaller house for especially those who are really kind of traumatized. I know that some in Kibera, Shofko, that this very secluded so that they heal for the time being because they can't go home. Therefore, as we work, I think we have a challenge as we work within shelter. We look at the guidelines and the protocols that will be able to work on in our context, so that we are not like maybe since it works in Canada and Sweden, it can work in our context. I think we need to look at all this, and that's why you find even with the COVID, government has been very reluctant to do a total lockdown. Because if you do a total lockdown where our context, maybe 60% are already living in Islam, what will you do with them? So I think that's why I think you need to do quite a lot of analysis, quite a bit of studies, so that we can be giving intervention that will work within our context, so that we can stop, even when the government gives maybe resources, because they have given national government affirmative fund, the one of Women County or Mama County, they have been given some resources, which they are free to use even in having these shelters. That we must have some data that point to that direction, that looking at the whole chain of gender-based violence, what intervention is needed where, and which are the most common gender-based violence. Like now you are aware we have been focusing very much on FGM and the steps that we need to take. So I can agree, yes, government has not been focusing so much on shelters, but we need to kind of walk through that chain and agree which one has got the lowest expenditure, but maximum impact on this issue we are tackling today. I think I want to stop here unless you have any other question, or if you want me to give my closing remark as I leave, because I'm going to another meeting. I want to thank you very much, especially the organizers, for putting this together, and for all of us who have attended. I think I want to thank you for putting it together. I also want to thank the UN women. They have always been there for us. Every time we are struggling how to sort our matter regarding women equality and gender equality and women empowerment, they have always been there. The UN family, I think we can't work. You have been with us in this journey, and we look forward to working with you. I want to stop here, Linda, and say thank you very much, and they commit my ministry and of course the government to supporting any effort that makes the life for women of Kenya better. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Professor Kobia, for gracing us. We appreciate the input and the commitments that you've shared from your ministry. We're looking forward to continued partnerships. As you've said, we move better and much quicker when we are moving forward as a movement, and for also reiterating aspects that contribute quite considerably to gender inequality, and obviously now trickling into one of the tenets, which is gender-based violence. And maybe just to highlight one comment here from Florence of Equality Now, who is asking the CS to please appear before our daily COVID briefings and highlight to the Kenyan public how survivors can be helped. So maybe Prof, you'll think about that, and we'd love to see you at the front line, and we are right behind you as you continue to take bold measures on gender issues. And also maybe to highlight, even though that you're leaving for another meeting, we know that your staff, your team will be listening in to the rest of the plenary session, and they will be sharing the feedback from the conversations that we'll be having in the next 30-35 minutes or so. I don't know if Wangeshi would like to say a word on behalf of the other panelists before you bid us farewell for the time being.
Okay. Thank you, Linda. For me, I would just want to convey my profound gratitude, Professor Kobia, for joining us in this conversation. I think it's very, very important that when we did invite you, you didn't hesitate to join us for this conversation. So we really thank you and the leadership role that you're taking at that ministry and ensuring that the women and girls of this country, men and boys, that there are issues that continue to be a challenge, that you're listening, but also you're taking action within the cabinet, pushing the agenda, even at those spaces, navigating and ensuring that we have very, very concrete policy being put in place to reflect the needs of women and girls, boys, and men in this country. So for us, as we just again to say thank you for joining us for this event. We feel honored and we look forward to the conversation. You have challenged us to do research. I think CREW will be supporting, with the support of UN Women, will be supporting shelters in Kenya. For the next 1 year, we are going to document, we are going to share results that are coming from there. Because I believe that if we provide that safety net for women who are going, especially intimate partner violence, it provides a space for them to breathe. So we'll document, we'll share with you, because I believe this COVID-19 then gives us an opportunity to look at all the issues that have not been covered and brought to the forth and resource. So thank you, and we deeply, deeply appreciate your time.
Okay, thank you very much. Just maybe before I go, I would like all of us to advocate towards cash transfers rather than people being given food. I think we already know, and I think it came earlier, that you don't want someone to be given unga, rice. How do you know that I could have bought something else? And the government, we influence that when the government now is giving cash, which means women can now be able to buy even their sanitary towel. So I think let's have this, whoever want to help during COVID time, can they work towards a cash transfer? Is more dignified for women rather than us going to queue for food or just be told, go to a shop and pick rice or sugar. I think that is important. The other program we coordinate behind the scene is Common Women Agenda, and I hope Wangeshi you know about it, because we say anytime we have made inroads is when, regardless of our orientation politically or socioeconomic, regardless of our diversity, when we have 5 issues and we want to follow through and deliver, it's only when women talk on the same voice. I think that is also important so that we are not so divided and then we don't achieve much. I thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you. Bye, Professor. Viewers, we still have about half an hour to go of our plenary session, and we've had quite a number of questions stream in, and I'll just commence with one here that says, I agree with the sentiments of Professor Kobia on the women's economic empowerment and obviously what we are calling the feminization of poverty in the country and how that can contribute to GBV, but also that GBV affects all women indiscriminately and that even women from wealthy and middle class homes experience GBV rooted in harmful cultural gender norms and patriarchy. So they want a qualification or an understanding of what aspect this would come in terms of other social cultural aspects that affect GBV across the board for women in Kenya. And I will give Wangeshi about a minute and a half to maybe answer, pardon me, to maybe answer this question, and anybody else would like to jump in.
Thank you, Linda. I think the question around what we do about dealing with violence against women, I keep saying that even as much as we are doing the response work, we must be able to go up and find out what are the real drivers of violence. And because there are models that have been able to be documented on what is working, I think Rwanda has a very, very good model that is called Eda Shakira. Eda Shakira is a model that looks at issues of, is a couples program that speaks to issues of power, talks around issues of money, when money is there, when money is not there. It looks at issues of communication. It also looks at issues of having a healthy relationships and how do we address conflict when it does happen without violence, because it's possible to resolve a conflict without having violence. But I also look at what are the potential triggers of violence, for example, for couples. Is it the issues of power? Is it around issues of money? Is it around issues of suspected infidelity? How do we, how does a couple resolve such issues? So there is a very, very good model that for couples, it has been seen, because when you look at issues of prevention, prevention looks at how do we stop the violence from happening? How do we ensure that the violence, if it has happened once, it doesn't happen again? So it does reduce violence. So there are very, very good models that have been documented within our African context. Rwanda, very, very close, that we can be able to adapt. And this is including even our churches and our mosque, where a lot of people go to seek refuge. If the churches, the mosque are able to adapt that, that would be very, very powerful. I think the other thing is around respect for women in our community. I think it's a high time we started respecting women and seeing women as equal as men, seeing boys and girls as equal. And if we do that as a society, then it takes us to the direction that we'll be saying that in our community, we are able to respect girls, we are able to respect our women, and they are also able to make decisions around their lives. So I think for me, I'll stop there, but I would say within our context, there are models that are working, and we should be able to adapt them for prevention work.
Thank you, Wangeshi, in highlighting that we do have all-encompassing and quite contextualized models that can be entrenched within our approaches in addressing the patriarchal aspects in terms of gender inequalities, and quite specifically to our conversation today on violence against women and girls. And moving from that context of respecting each other into the very nitty-gritties of everyday relationships between intimate partners, let me throw this question from Moses Ogutu to you, Alberta. Hi, sir, madam. Well, we're all madams. Just two questions. In the news, we have seen cases where mediators of conflicts amongst couples and families are killed or injured. What's the right way to go about solving such issue where one doesn't get hurt? And two, and in the case where couples separate due to conflict, then come back together again, it begins to be an issue of back and forth. What does one do about that? Who would have liked to help but is discouraged by those circumstances? I reckon this is from a very community advocacy approach, Alberta, and maybe you can highlight a little bit more about the intricate details of managing GBV within the intimate partner context.
So important to mention is around this COVID situation, you've also had a rise in intimate partner violence. And key to note, as late as last week, I know we received some male survivors who had been physically actually abused by their wives. One broke their arm, and I think one was even had a deep cut on their arm. So I'll answer a bit and I'll give it back to Wangeshi from the community point of it. When survivors come to the Gender Violence Recovery Center, our purpose is to support the survivors and their families. So it rightfully then does not help if then you support one partner only and then the other one. So what I'm trying to say is that when we are having the counseling sessions, for example, there are times that we get the significant other or the support system to be part of the sessions for different reasons. And each case is also very unique. So there are different ways of having that mediation. I know FIDA does mediation on itself, you know, as a program. For us, then we just provide the psychosocial support and would then make referrals to relevant institutions. So I'd hand over to Wangeshi.
Okay. I think the issues around intimate partner violence has been highlighted and continues to be highlighted as one of the leading forms of violence against women. And even as an organization, is that the biggest percentage of cases that we have, at about 46%, is cases of intimate partner violence. I will go back to the model that I mentioned. Is a Rwanda documented, very, very documented, and has been implemented or has been implemented for more than 3 years, has been evaluated as a very, very model that is giving positive results when it comes to dealing with issues of intimate partner violence. And I hope we can be able to post it here so that whoever is working on issues of intimate partners can be able to look at how they can be able to adapt it within the context. We are also going to be adapting it as an organization, having learned about it and seeing it. But for me, the issues around intimate partner violence, it's very, very important to look at what are the issues that are ailing the couples. How do we have very, very healthy relationships? And also when conflict does occur, how do we resolve issues in a way that is very, very, it is not conflict, it is not violent based. So for me, that will be the starting point. And here is not done only to the women. You must be able to bring the couples together to be able to identify where are the sources of conflict. when the couple feel that the violence or it's about to get to the violence, what should I take? What are the red flags? But also be able to observe within where you are. Is it possible to report the case? Is it possible to be able to share within your friends that if I'm going through violence, this is what I'm likely to do? Are you able to signal? Within our homes in Nyumbakumi, where we live, is it possible that if a violence case does happen, we can be able to support such survivors? But also very, very important, how do we walk them through that journey? Because I think there is always a balancing that women are doing or continue to do, and they're put in a very, very difficult position because they're thinking their children involved. How do I leave my children behind? Where do I get space even to be able to breathe? And for me, that's why I'll go back to the issue of this of the shelters, so that we are able to direct them to such a place where they can be able to seek that kind of refuge. So for me, I would really encourage that we look at how we can be able to adopt such a model. The other thing is that within our local radio shows, is it possible to be able to have those messages in our vernacular? A lot of people in this country listen to radios, and radios that are community-based and national one. Can we be able to have messages going in those spaces? How do we bring our religious leaders also to speak in the same message? We have also been doing bulk messaging and targeting more than 50,000 individuals in our database. Again, on messaging, on prevention, but also response when it does happen. So for me, those are some of the suggestions that I'll give around intimate partner violence.
Awesome, thank you. Thank you, Alberta. Thank you, Wangeshi. Before we move to a few questions on our live feed, allow me to pose this question to you, Anna, in regard with some of the concerns that we are putting forward as state and non-state actors working on preventing, responding, and managing gender-based violence in the country. And Professor Kobe did highlight this. We're afraid of taking back or clawing back on some of the gains that we've made in terms of the responses that we've had in the past, in the last couple of years, which have been quite significant, but we still have quite a bit to go. So how can we ensure that we all, as partners within this sector, as partners in the gender equality aspect, prevent this rollback of gains that have been made in terms of preventing and managing GBV, violence against women in the country?
Thank you very much, Linda. I'm so encouraged to see the level of exchange that is going on the chat forum, and I think we will be responding to what we can, and hope that perhaps whatever that we are not able to respond to now gives us ideas of, you know, what issues we should take up next. As Wangeshi and Alberta were speaking, I also wanted to just, maybe before I get to your question, I wanted to just also mention some very encouraging and promising initiatives and models in Africa that have worked in Africa, but also beyond Africa, like in Asia and the Caribbean. And this is the SASA approach that is championed through raising voices. So it has also been tried, tested, evaluated, and there are a lot of lessons that are coming from there. And essentially, for those that are not aware of SASA, we can also post perhaps links to how this model works, but it takes into account that when we have raised awareness, so awareness would be the first point, you know, the radio messages that Wangeshi was talking about, all of these initiatives that we are talking about to discourage violent dispute resolution. Then how do you move therefore? Because we can't just stay in baby space where we say, oh, raise awareness, raise awareness. We want them to take the next step from awareness raising. So we make personal commitments And then from the personal commitments, we go on to the action, you know, at the individual level, at the community level, at society level. And there is space for everybody to participate there. So at the individual level, you're also talking to men and saying, so if you are now an advocate against violence, against GBV, what action can you take as an individual man? And then really getting them to be at the forefront, to be the voices that are championing against violent dispute resolution, against intimate partner violence, and them being very visible in that role, so that they also speak to other men, so that it's not just Wangeshi or Albeta or myself or you, Linda, or CS Kobia who are speaking, but we have these male champions in parliament, the religious leaders, at community level, who is it that men listen to? And then can those be the ones that are championing this change? And I think the campaign on he for she is also trying to build onto that and saying, can we have men who believe in this thing against gender-based violence to be very visible in their leadership and using their voices visibly, not speaking only in closed up spaces, but being out there, you know, and then and running with the message. So I just thought I would use this opportunity to just jump in quickly before I respond to the question you asked me. I wanted to perhaps just redirect your question, if you allow me, and say that, you know, we are facing a crisis right now, and the crisis is around COVID-19. But we will not allow ourselves to perhaps lose the opportunity that COVID-19 is presenting to change the way we prevent and respond to gender-based violence. So crisis always, yes, disrupts our lives, it destroys our livelihoods, it does all of these negative things. It causes, like in this case, it causes people to lose their lives, right? And at the same time, it has also caused an upsurge in cases of gender-based violence. But we will not just sit back and wallow in self-pity and talk about how increased violence and so on. Rather, we should see the opportunity that this is bringing to change things positively and ensure that after COVID is out of our lives, we don't go back to what we had before COVID in terms of GBV, but that we use these as concrete steps that we are saying, yes, COVID, yes, disrupted our lives, but this is the opportunity that came out of that. And I want to just give a quick example that I really like to share to demonstrate this point. So for those that are familiar with the history of Northern Uganda, we know that there was a civil war there, which resulted in almost over 2 million people being displaced internally. And as they were in displacement for almost 20 years, what happened? There was a big risk because these people were then moved to IDP camps for internally displaced people. So as they were in encampment, there was a real danger when they stepped out of the IDP camps. There was a danger that for women, they would be abducted, raped, killed, or, you know, abducted to become wives of the rebels in the bush. There was also, you know, risk for men at the same time that they would be killed or abducted and forced to go and fight alongside the rebels. So there was risk for men and for women. However, women put aside this risk because families still had to be fed, you know, the families still had to be provided for, land still had to be tilled, food had to be grown. So facing that risk, they still went out of the IDP camps and they were growing food, they were doing all of these activities. And indeed, the risk materialized for some of them, but for most of them, they stayed and continued to work with international NGOs, national NGOs, who were also helping them with livelihood support. So gradually, power shifted from women being, you know, at the back and men making all the decisions and providing for families. Power shifted, and women embraced that role of now being the ones that were providing for food, the ones that were making decisions, the ones that were now engaging in economic activity, and so on. Now, when war ended and then they went back to their homes outside of the IDP camps, this power that women had became a point of negotiation now with men, because some men, you know, would have wanted power to revert back to them after 20 years, saying, now, you know, this is not how things are done in my household. This is not how things are done in our society. Rather, they negotiated around that power with women, and then it became shared power that was available to men and women, you know, making joint decisions, making all these income generating activities at family and household level. So what am I saying here? I'm saying that crisis, yes, came, but then with that, it brought about a social change in how gender roles and decision making, what power was redistributed. So in the same case for us here in Kenya and globally, we have this crisis of COVID-19. Instead of just wallowing in pity and pitting and crying about how GBV has gone up, we are also challenging ourselves, and this is what we are doing through this platform, that we have grabbed the attention of world leaders in terms of GBV. We've been talking a lot about how perhaps the police need to, you know, set aside or set up specialized units to deal with GBV. We've been talking about the lack of data on GBV in the country. And I know for those who have been following, it might have been one of the things that costed us a participation in the Spotlight initiative, because as a country, we didn't have ready data on GBV. We've been talking about how cases take so long in the judiciary to be heard. We've been talking about, you know, the need to engage in mass communication to change attitudes and practices towards GBV. So now we have the momentum that has been created by COVID. We grab that opportunity to then say we will not go back again. We are going to seize this power. We are going to seize this opportunity and really demand, our foot is in the door right now. Let that door open widely. And then all of these initiatives, let them be, you know, what spurs us into the next stages of programming in terms of prevention and in terms of response, and never to go back again to where COVID found us. Linda, one last minute, and then I'll conclude. I also wanted to say we have all seen how lives have changed at home, with all of us being stuck at home and working from home. We've been talking about the issue of unpaid care work all this time, and no one was listening. Now we have men and women spending time at home, more time at home. Men beginning to appreciate a bit more what just is involved in terms of running a family, in terms of managing a home without paying a salaried manager. You know, now they are aware of the roles to do with children, they are aware of the roles to do with elderly and the sick, washing, cleaning, cooking, everything, right? And for the progressive men, they've started taking part in sharing the roles at home. So that is also an opportunity that's being created by COVID-19. Why should we go back to pre-COVID when COVID is out of our lives? Let us continue to embrace those shared responsibilities at home, but also bring to the attention of government the whole issue of unpaid care work, recognize it, redistribute it, and reduce it by making, you know, time and labor saving devices and social protection and child care facilities for women, so that we can engage more in the economic spaces, in the political spaces, and not spend the rest of our lives, you know, carrying out unpaid care work at home. Thank you, and over.
Thank you so much, Anna, for bringing out those issues, highlighting the conversations on an inclusive model in terms of tackling gender inequality, so that we effectively address the negative effects of gender inequality, and quite specifically begin making considerable steps towards addressing and eradicating or ending gender-based violence, as we committed last year in November 2019 during the ICPD conference, where we want to accelerate the promise, which is the theme that we are running with for this conversation. And in the last few minutes, I'd like to take live questions from the audience to help us contextualize some of the conversation that has been going on in the chat box. Laura Wawuda from Kilifi, if you're still online, we'd like to receive your question. The team should be able to unmute and allow you to share with us your question and sentiments. Laura Wawuda from Kilifi County. I can see you're there. If you could please unmute your microphone and speak to our panelists. Laura? Okay, as we await Laura to connect, our next live question is coming from William Mbanya Mlenge from Narok. I hope I got that right. Mbanya Mlenge from Narok. William, if you're also present, the team will unmute you and you'll be able to share a question to the panelists. Please remember to unmute your microphone so that we are all able to hear you, panelists and our viewers for this webinar session. Great, Laura.
Okay, I'm Laura Wawuda from Kilifi County. My questions go to the Executive Director for GBVRC. We have seen a lot of women being stigmatized at the GBV centers. So as a director, what plans are you having, or what can you tell us about the stigma that you are seeing at the hospitals in regards to the survivors?
Awesome, thank you, Laura. Alberta, please note down the question. Let me take two more and then we can be able to answer them comprehensively. Laura, if you don't mind, could you kindly mute your mic? Thank you so much. Our next two participants, we cannot find William, so we'll keep looking for you, William, but I have 3 hands that I will give priority to. Abdul Nasir, Wikali Mutune, and Esther Kimani for now. So Abdul Nasir, Mwikali Mutune, Esther Kimani. Team, if we could have them brought into the conversation. Abdul Nasir, if you could go first and please share with us your question to the panelists and to all our attendees so that we are able to hear you.
Yes.
And please tell us where you're from. Sorry, please tell us where you're from too.
Good afternoon, Miss Linda and the team.
Good afternoon.
Yes, I'm Abdul, I'm from Mombasa. Yes, so mine was not actually a question, but it's a warm-up follow-up on the conversation on GBV, women empowerment, and issues to do with gender equality. Yeah? It is my position that gender equality is not an idle statement within the law or the constitution. These are issues that drain down from our society, from the household in the families, going up to marriages and up to interrelationship skills in terms of job opportunities and everything. So it is my view that the civil society and the various groups that are piling up a lot of pressure, which is really, really commendable, to stop these issues of femicide. We have issues to do in universities, people losing lives recklessly because of certain gender, which is so unfair. So as much as there are policy issues, these are stemmed issues that must be addressed within our household. There are so many communities that feel that this conversation is so uncomfortable. We must shake that uncomfortable nature of this conversation. We must ensure that you must nurture your son. And just politely, when we are talking about women empowerment, we must also empower the son to ensure that to ensure that your daughter, your auntie is equally protected within the framework of the law and as well as in terms of the policies framework. So my point is that we need to put a lot of conversation from societies within our household and family setups so that we appreciate this aspect. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Awesome. Thank you, Abdul. I will posit your statement or commentary to Anna and Wangeshi for a follow-up on that. And for the next and last question for this round, if we could have Mwikali Mutune.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Mwikali.
Can you hear me?
You? Yeah.
Oh, excellent. So I come from Nairobi County. I'm a feminist activist. And I just wanted to, first of all, just add a small star from the previous follow-up from Abdul from Mombasa. And just to mention that as commentary, that it's also the responsibility of men to actually raise boys who actually also embrace gender equality. And sometimes we struggle with that dynamic as feminists because what happens is that the narrative starts looking like, oh, as a woman, it is your job to raise a good son, which for me is something that is very problematic. And I think everyone just needs to understand that at a deeper level and find ways to that men in the community can also take their part of the job, which is to mentor boys who actually understand that they and their other sisters and the rest of the girls in the community are equal. Now, moving on to my question, I wanted to find out when it comes to the refugee communities specifically, because I do recognize that with the lockdowns, there must be a lot more security measures being implemented also in refugee camps. And my question is, how have we gotten any reports with regards to the numbers of SGBV coming from those areas? And also, second and finally, I wanted to also ask whether they are able to access any organizations in their areas where they can actually get assistance in the event that they're at risk of sexual exploitation, or if they've undergone any other form of GBV. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mwikali. I'm told that I will assign your query on refugees to Anna from UN Women. She should be able to nuance around some of the measures agencies such as UNHCR and other UN agencies have taken towards, including UN Women, have taken towards addressing GBV within our refugee population here in the country. Lastly, I'm being told that Esther, we have found you. If you could kindly just unmute yourself and give us our last question.
Okay, thank you very much, Linda. My name is Esther from Nairobi. I just wanted to ask, when COVID, pandemic was declared a pandemic, there was the heightened cases of GBV that we all know. And one of the recommendations that was there at that time was then to have the government really fully resource the 1195 and have, shelter. So my question is, how far has that gone? Organizations like CRU, GVRC were part of those that were really championing to get a fully fledged government, fully resourced hotline that will be able to help women who've gone through violence. And also, apart from that, also to think about how can we also get the government to actually own this process, have shelters that are government-led, government-funded, government-resourced, so that then, because for organizations funding ends, so we have a government-owned process that we know women and girls are safe and they know where they can be able to go just in case they are violated. So for me, really is to know what happened and how can we then continue the momentum and see how far the government can go in terms of really ensuring we have a fully resourced hotline plus, fully resourced shelters and safe houses where women can be able to go. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Esther from Nairobi County. Your question was very specific to CRU and GVRC, so I'll assign that to Wangeshi and Alberta. So I think now we can move on to the answering of the questions, and I'll start with you, Alberta, with the question that came from Laura from Kilifi County, but also just to quickly compound it, in terms of the clinical management of GBV, to a question that was asked in the chat box by Tisa Oyo on measures that are being taken on the ground in terms of availability of drugs, particularly emergency pills, PEP, to safeguard against HIV, unintended pregnancies for survivors of sexual violence, etc., etc. Over to you, Alberta.
So thank you, Laura, too. So Laura, I'll start with the stigma. You talked about the stigma when the clients go to the hospitals. One thing I've learned over the years is that when you're at the hospital and you as a person, you're not different entities. So tying up with what Abdul was saying about Mombasa, about socialization and having conversations, and that's what not just at the hospital as a service delivery, but also the police station. It starts with ourselves and how we treat survivors of gender-based violence or how we tolerate gender-based violence. So it's a whole conversation from when we are born, how we are sensitized, and our attitude and perceptions towards gender-based violence. So when you already have a grown-up nurse or clinician or a policeman, and then, yes, we're having those conversations also then, but I look at it at more of stigmatization and discrimination as a country or as a society, for example. So what has happened is that we have, and together with many other partners, there are capacity enhancement sessions that are being done for service providers, yes. And it doesn't start with, this is the clinical management of gender-based violence or the psychosocial support that you need to provide. It starts with also you reflecting on your perceptions, your belief, deconstructing a lot of mindsets and things like that. And part of the primary prevention we're talking about and community, so those conversations are even starting at a lower age, even in schools. Even for myself, for example, as a parent, how I behave, for example, at home. How do my children, for example, perceive, as I'm having interactions with my spouse and things like that. So it starts from there. So I wouldn't say that discrimination is just wholly at the hospital level, but also it's a conversation that we need to have continuously as a country, or rather as a people and community. Laura, you also asked about how then we make sure, that was also on the chat box, but also later, how we also then make sure that these services are trickled down, especially to survivors from the rural areas. So what has happened during the COVID, way before COVID, about for a year or so, the Gender Sector Working Group, together with the Ministry of Health and State Department of Gender, were developing guidelines on setting up gender-based violence coverage centers. And that's also under an intergovernmental framework that Council of Governors were also part of, and different ministries. So what happened when COVID started, the COVID crisis started, these guidelines were already released. What GVSC specifically was doing even before COVID is to set up GBV centers at the county health facilities. So then it was about cascading or making sure that these services, the commodities, are within, for example, the nearer or rather accessible. The hotlines that we talked about earlier that I know, the 1195, Wangeshi has one, GVSA has one. That's also a way that we're providing services in terms of reporting, in terms of referrals, rescues, but also providing psychosocial support for these survivors. I think I've answered my questions. Yes?
Yes, you have, Alberta. I think it has also nuanced on the other question that was put up on availability of commodities. Is there anything that you'd like to highlight on that?
Yes, the availability of commodities, yes, that has been a challenge, especially we're talking about the post-exposure prophylactic. So the different players in the weekly meetings that we've been having, we've also been having government representation, specifically even the Ministry of Health and Division of Reproductive Health. And now the services, the commodities are available. The ones I know, if Tabby is here, the ones that I know have not been available, for example, were the contraceptives in terms of condoms, and I can't remember which other ones, but the ones under family planning. But including that, the Ministry of Health has also set up guidelines to be able to, on family planning, for example, on maternal health, on gender-based violence, so that then all this can come into play. So yes, I agree, when COVID started, there was a lapse. There was no deliberate attention to gender-based violence or to sexual reproductive health and rights. And there was a gap in terms of service delivery there. But now we have since caught up on the same. Adding also to Laura earlier, the stigma for survivors has also been compounded by COVID-19. So when the survivors come, and in a lot of health facilities, as earlier reported, not now, is that health frontline workers were scared to support survivors of gender-based violence because they did not have PPEs. And those who had did not have the right information about how they can be able to protect themselves. So that has also been, there's also been a lot of training on PPEs and safety for frontline workers, and that has also improved. Thank you, Lynn. Linda?
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. Thank you, Alberta. Moving on to the second question, which was from Abdul in Mombasa. I pegged this one on Anna and Wangeshi as a follow-up, which was based on the social cultural aspects that he nuanced as the bedrock of a lot of the GBV cases that we see in our society, aside from the policy input that had been shared earlier by Professor Kobia, where he put it forward as a call to action. Maybe to briefly, very briefly, just highlight on his commentary and his insights and share a little bit more about that. Anna and Wangeshi.
I think I can go first. I think what he has highlighted is a comment to really emphasize that the respect for women and girls in this country is not just a promissory notes, either in our constitution, in our policies in the country, in our laws that is in the country, that it needs to move to where we experience it. We experience it as women, we experiencing it as girls, but also the respect that comes from both men and boys. I think for me, just to emphasize that that's the right direction. It cannot only be where we say it in law, but in practice is different. So it must be in tandem, what is in the law and what is happening, and continuously then working on that to ensure that the two of them are in tandem. Let me stop there because I know we have a few minutes and we must then come to almost to an end of our session.
Some quick or any additional commentary, Anna?
Thank you, Linda, and thank you to, I think it was Abubakar. It's very true what he observes, and I think for us, all of us who are on the call, it is also to say how do we complement what is already there in our constitution, in our laws, which really looks at the sanctity of life. It really looks at issues to do with bodily integrity, issues to do with freedom from inhuman and degrading and cruel punishment or treatment. So all of those, you can consider them as, the provisions that are there in our constitution and in our laws that then need to be translated into behaviors, into practices. And you cannot do enough awareness raising, and you cannot do enough engagement around positive and toxic masculinities. I always bite my tongue when I talk about masculinities. Yes, I got it. So, so the conversations really to say, we are brought up in ways, or we are bringing up even our boys right now in ways that say to them, this is the way to behave as a man, and this is, how to handle yourself and how you view women and so on. So starting from that tender age and starting to undo all of those negative masculinities, the toxic that we are busy feeding into our children, and then they carry on to become adult men, even when the law is very clear around the constitution and the freedom that every individual is entitled to, including women. So I think it's to take all of those side by side and say, you know, this is what the law provides for. It doesn't say specifically the respect for women, but it is still understood that these provisions in the Constitution, in the law, this is what they are talking about. And then how do we actualize them in practice through a process of deconstructing some very negative norms that we have embraced as part of our being. I know there was a question for me, so just allow me to answer it, if I may, on UNHCR and the work on refugees. So very quickly to say that we have not forgotten about refugees in this context of COVID-19 and GBV. So we have the lead agency that works with refugees, and that is UNHCR, but partnering with a number of other UN agencies, including UNFPA, UN Women, UNICEF, and so on, and working with the partner organizations, the international organizations, the national organizations, the community-based organizations. So just wanting to point out that if we are saying that it is difficult for women to report violence, GBV, or men for that matter, to report GBV in everyday context. So if you're Kenyan and you are having challenges reporting GBV, consider how hard or harder it is for a refugee who is already feeling like, you know, they don't belong, or maybe they are stateless, or, you know, they are here at the generous kindness of the host government. So it is even harder for refugees to report. So now, all of us who are working with the refugee community, we are aware that the issues of data for GBV are even harder among the refugee communities, right? So, but all the same, UNHCR and all these partners that I mentioned, they've partnered with the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics and the World Bank in conducting a rapid response phone survey to understand the experiences of GBV in this context of COVID-19. And the results are yet to come out. And once they are out, they will also help, you know, point out the specific vulnerabilities that refugees are facing. And but even as the results are being waited for, there is ongoing individual case management for those that come out. And then there is hotline services that is offering remote counseling and referral services, which are all being provided as part of the COVID-19 response and as part of the overall refugee response in Kenya. Thank you, and over.
Thank you so much, Ms. Anna Mutavati. I think your comments now bring us to the winding up session for today's webinar. And mine would be, before I invite Wangeshi to give us our closing remarks, and also to highlight the query that had been asked by Esther in terms of shelters and the hotline response being driven by partners, Crew GVRC and others, is just to highlight some of the key takeaways from the conversation that we've had today during the webinar. Highlighted by Professor Kobia, Ms. Anna Mutavati, Ms. Wangeshi Wachira, and Ms. Alberta Wambua, in terms of accelerating our action towards ending, responding, and managing gender-based violence and violence against women in Kenya. That one is partnership. We do have to continue to work together as state and non-state actors to make considerable headway in this fight against GBV. We've seen the potential clawback or the potential loss of gain in terms of the progress we've made due to COVID-19. But one key thing has been mentioned, and this is the second part: opportunities. We have learned to collaborate more. We've learned to complement each other across the board. And this then should be something to be accelerated during the COVID-19 pandemic and after the pandemic. The other is data. we are now considerably picking up data collection, both at county and national level, in terms of GBV, ensuring that GBV indicators are part of what we report to the Ministry of Health, to the Ministry of Gender. So to gear up this data collection, data management, in order to be able to inform the interventions that we have on the ground as state and non-state actors, our referral pathways, which again goes towards encouraging us to work together more. We work with the judiciary, we work with the police, we work with civil society, we work with quite a number of community mobilizers and community representatives, our administrative representatives, the chiefs, assistant chiefs. It's quite a complex system, but we all have a role to play in ensuring that these pathways are clear, are able to flow seamlessly from one point to the next. And the other is maintaining the dignity and safety of our survivors. We have talked about shelters considerably, and at the behest of Professor Kobia, being able to understand what type of shelters do we want, how do we contextualize them to the unique situations that survivors of GBV find themselves in. We know that men are also survivors of GBV. So looking at the intricate details, looking at what our data is telling us, and being able to put forward evidence-based measures on the ground. So for me, it has been quite a wonderful conversation. It has been quite insightful, and we will continue with this conversation aside from the webinar. Please do reach out to us on Twitter if you are not able to share your commentary on here, at Crew Kenya, at Kendin Kenya, at GVRC Kenya, at UN Women Kenya, and also therein you'll find the personal handles of all the panelists that have been a part of today's session. So without further ado, I now invite Wangeshi to give us our closing remarks. Wangeshi, if you could unmute yourself.
There.
There
Can
we
you
go.
hear me now?
Yes, yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. I think for me, this has been a very, very great afternoon, spending together with you and talking about very, very pertinent issues on gender-based violence. I will, as I conclude, I think one is to remind that we have a toll-free line. You can be able to reach us for counseling, for legal support and referral. And the number again is 0800 20186. I think this was already shared on the chat box. As an organization, we are also grateful, working very closely with UN Women. We'll be able to support shelters in Nairobi. We are on the tail end and we'll be able to support that. We also in discussion with a partner, and potentially we are going to support another 10 counties, at least with a shelter in all those counties. And these counties, really the counties that have been hit by COVID-19, but we hope that we can be able to work together with partners to refer, to support the women who are going through violence during this period. We don't know how long this COVID is gonna take. Until we get probably a cure or get a vaccine, I think it's very, very paramount to be able to work together. We'll also continue with our work around the community messaging, and this is through our the various community radio shows. Very, very important to emphasize the messaging on ending gender-based violence and violence against women. We'll also be working on cash transfer, which we have already started identifying, and this is going to survivors of gender-based violence. Of course, there will be a process of ensuring that there is a due process, but we are targeting very vulnerable women who at this time are going through difficult times. And therefore, cash transfer, I think the Cabinet Secretary had already identified, is dignifying. The women are able to identify what is it that they need, and they're able to make decisions. It gives them agency to make decisions around that kind of money. So anybody else doing food or vouchers, maybe they can consider cash transfer as a way of dignifying the decisions that have been taken by women in their agency. In addition to that is that we'll also be working very closely with nascent women-led organizations, and this based at the county level, again, for them to be able to continue with the advocating for issues that affect them, because we believe as an organization, so there are challenges, but solutions will also come from the community. So they must be community driven. So we'll be supporting 13 nascent organizations. And this is a partnership we are currently with CARE, Uraia. Urgent Action continues to remain open to be able to support advocacy work around the issues of gender-based violence. So that's also a place you can be able to get some resources to be able to do some advocacy work. And as I conclude, I just want to convey my profound gratitude for your participation this afternoon. Our audience today, my God, what would I say? We got a lot of questions. There were already also solutions. You challenged us as a panel to be able to think, to be able to provide what is working, and also carrying this discussion moving forward. To the panelists, oh my God, I wish you had more time. I really want to thank you for your commitment, giving us very, very practical solutions on how we can be able to move this conversation forward. I know that we are in this together, and we are really looking forward for more collaboration, because the change that we are looking for is really meaningful, and we deeply need it. And we want to ensure that even as we flatten the curve on violence, on COVID, that the same energy, the same resourcing that is being done can also be done for violence against women and girls and gender-based violence. Linda, we really want to thank you for moderating this session so well. We deeply appreciate your time. And to our crew team that has made this possible, Dennis, Mercy, Christine, Angelina, oh my God, the team can, Joshua, thank you so much. I deeply, deeply appreciate. Thank you, everybody. We have this session, we had about 139 participants who were able to join on the webinar. Of course, we have those ones who are able to join on the Facebook Live. Thank you, everybody, and have a lovely evening. Thank you, and God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.
Hello, please, if all the panelists could remain.
Oh, you're right, yeah.
Anna left.
Okay.
I was about to leave.